Okay, so I was saying something about Jar Jar. Oh, yeah, yeah. Now I remember. So Jar Jar might be in grandparent mode and saying, um, you know, be cautious about displaying pride. That's different. I'm so proud of you. Let's talk about this later. I'm so, keep quiet. We're in a library right now, or we're at church, or we're at the funeral. I'm so glad that you know, that you just thought of your basketball performance or being able to ride a bike and are telling me about it. That's awesome. And, you know, you should be modest. We should talk about that later. That's completely different from you should be ashamed. You shouldn't be so proud of yourself. Oh, why are you? You're proud because you threw a little 3-inch ball into a 4-foot tall hoop. I can hit. I take a bigger ball that's 8 foot diameter. No, 8-inch diameter, and throw it into like a 12-foot high rim. You're not as good as me. You're only 6. I'm 12. So, we can imagine a variety of different contexts. In which Jar Jar could be talking to whoever Jar Jar could be talking to, their grandchild, their I don't know what Jar Jar, what the name of that creature is as far as the race of Jar Jars, but anyway, you should be ashamed. Okay, so you should be ashamed, because you can't do as good a Jar Jar impression as I can probably. If you can do a better Jar Jar impression than me, keep it to yourself, okay? This is a time for modesty. I am the best Jar Jar impressionist ever, as long as nobody else does any impressions of Jar Jar because of my incredible intimidation skills. Then I will be the best Jar Jar impersonator in history. In fact, that was me. I was hired for the latest film. Not that Jar Jar's in it, but if he were to have been in it, they just hired me so that, if they needed to have some voiceovers or anything for Jar Jar, they would have me available. Because that's bragging, right? So that's not only bragging, but that's like the kind of things that kids or teenagers may often do, is they make up stories to impress each other, and it can be done in a very playful, joking way. Like I was just doing it. Like obviously you wouldn't believe what I just said, I assume. So if I'm doing it in a joking way, I'm just, I'm attempting to be amusing. I'm amusing myself, whether anybody else is amused by it. So there you go. Very important stuff. Very, very important. So if you were thinking that you might want to be hired by Lucasfilms to do a Jar Jar impression for any future films, I am warning you. I don't want you to compete with me. Okay, so that would be anxiety, right? That's not pride. Maybe it's not shame, but that gets into shaming. I'm jumping ahead because I love this example, and maybe I'll come back to the Jar Jar example. Self-respect is absent. You should be ashamed. You remember those little dolls that you'd pull a cord and it'd make like a Bugs Bunny or whatever? What's up, Doc? Or whatever. I'm not doing my Bugs Bunny voice today. Sorry. Because I'm a Jar Jar specialist, bitches. All right. So if, what was I saying? Before Jar Jar rudely interrupted me. So if shame is an effect, how is it that people produce that effect? We've talked about shame a little bit. We've talked about pride. We've talked about Jar Jar shaming Boba Fett. So if shame is an effect or a result, an outcome, an experience, whatever, how is it that people would produce that effect? When someone is effective at producing a result that does not fit with their actual motivations, then they experience shame. This is might be surprising. Might be more surprising than pride. So let's explore a bit further. So I produce a result effectively, and I experience shame at being effective at doing something. And then I experience shame. What does that signal? That the thing I was just effective at is not in alignment with my innate motivations, might even be contrary to my innate motivations. Somebody somehow influences me to do something, I do it, I'm effective at it, and I experience shame. And I realize that is contrary to my innate motivations. Ooh, was that kind of interesting or surprising? So there's no shame in failing to be effective. People aren't ashamed at failure, or not When there is shame and there's failure present, they're not shamed about the failure. There's no shame in failing to be effective in pursuing an outcome that inspires you. When I'm, if I fail to be effective in pursuing an outcome that inspires me, I try to throw the little 3-inch diameter ball into the hoop. I fail. I fail 9 out of 100 times. Then I fail 89 out of 100 times. Then next time around, 84 out of 100 times. And I'm just failing so much. Is there any shame when I fail? No. Oh my gosh, I got it. I did it. Did you see that? Did we record that one? I fail hundreds of times, whatever, dozens, hundreds, thousands of times. I'm only noting the ones where I am successful. Lots and lots of failure isn't shameful when I'm acting in alignment with motivation or what inspires me, what intrigues me, fascinates me, motivates me. There's no shame in failing to be effective in the pursuit of an outcome that inspires you. There will be some degree of disappointment. Oh, I missed that one. Try again. Oh, I missed that one too. Try again. Oh, totally whiffed. Didn't even hit the rim. Oh, try again. I missed that. Oh, I missed 29 in a row. Try again. Whatever. They don't, maybe there's a more intense disappointment after missing 29 in a row. Maybe I get closer to the net. Maybe I lower the net. Whatever. But there's no shame. There's just, there might be disappointment. Yeah. Lots and lots of little disappointments. Maybe occasional big disappointments. Maybe some, I don't know if this is something I'm capable of doing today. I'm so frustrated, right? They can be frustrated. So change do something different. Move the net to make it easier. Move closer to the net. Whatever. Shame doesn't have to be a big factor in that. If I get really frustrated too, then maybe shooting hoops isn't, throwing this little ball through the rim, the little net. Maybe that's not a great match for what I actually really want to be doing. I'd rather be doing blah, 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 blah. But if I'm not, then frustration may arise when I fail. So shame isn't the result of failure. When I'm pursuing something that really motivates me, there will be some degree of disappointment almost, in any exploration of something that motivates me. Something I'm going to do will be ineffective, so I will naturally have some degree of disappointment, maybe very moderate, but, I'm aware, okay, that didn't work. Disappointed in that. Move on. It's not, oh my God, I'm so disappointed. It's not like that kind of really dramatic, whining. That's a different thing. But disappointment is natural. I want to produce a result. I don't produce it. I fail to produce it. Or I only partly produce it, or it takes a really long time. Well, then I'm disappointed. And there's no issue with it. There's no agonizing. There's no whining. There's no trying to avoid disappointment. No. I keep shooting hoops. I miss a lot. I get better. I miss less. I'm disappointed whenever I miss. Oh, I missed the game winner 1 out of 5 times or 4 out of 5 times. Well, of course I'll be disappointed. To some extent. So what? So when I'm pursuing an outcome that inspires me, failing doesn't reduce in any way the original intensity of the inspiration, the motivation. I'm not doing it in order to maintain the motivation. I'm doing it because I'm motivated to do it. So if I fail, I'm still motivated to do it. Nothing's changed in regard to the core motivation. I'm not trying to do something just to impress somebody. If my motivation is to impress somebody, which might be a totally valid, real motivation, then, I want to find something that actually works to impress them. I want to be effective in something that impresses them. That's more complex. So let's get back to just the simple stuff. Shame is basically an extreme form of grief. Not just disappointment, but grief. Shame is basically an extreme form of grief, like when grief has been suppressed for a long time and has built up and then erupts to the surface. Oh my gosh, this is horrible. That's grieving. I mentioned whining a minute ago. I mentioned shame. So the grief is an association with taking actions that are not in alignment with one's inspiration, at least in the form of grief I'm calling shame. That's an association with taking actions and even being effective that are not in alignment with one's inspiration. What if I'm not effective? Would I still have grief? If I'm taking actions that are not in alignment with my motivation, then I'll have grief whether or not I'm effective. Does that make sense? If I do things contrary to my motivations, I'm going to have grief that I'm doing things contrary to my motivations, effective or not. If I'm effective, I'll have shame. So as long as one is unsuccessful in taking actions that do not fit with one's inspiration or contrary, so if I'm taking actions that are contrary to my inspiration and I'm unsuccessful in terms of being ineffective, then there's a kind of comfort in my ongoing failure because I'm doing something contrary to my motivation. So I actually prefer failing over being effective, which will produce shame. So I will sustain just that more moderate level of grief by consistently failing at the thing that I'm not really that interested in doing. Even if I say I am, if I'm not interested, or if I'm, I really want to just, if my actual sincere relation to that outcome is that I prefer to fail than to be effective, then guess what? I might say, somebody might say I'm sabotaging it. No, I'm intentionally, it's not that I'm sabotaging it per se. I'm just, intentionally failing, or we could say unintentionally failing, but I'm not going to do it well. Or chances are I'm not going to do it well. I would prefer doing it poorly than to do it well if we're talking about producing an outcome that is contrary to my motivations. Or my priorities. My motivations at a particular point in time. If I have a certain priority, I don't want to be successful at some other priority. I want to be successful at the priority. I want that priority handled, and then at a later time there might be a new priority, a new thing that's the top priority. So once someone has been effective at producing a targeted result that is contrary to their motivations, there's no more hiding behind the ineffectiveness. So there's no more hiding that whole operation wasn't in alignment with my motivations. So once I'm effective, I don't have that ongoing comfort of failure to shield me or cushion me from, the fact that I'm acting contrary to my inspiration. So the fact that the target has not matched one's inspiration can be internally recognized oneself once they're successful, in particular, and that mismatch can also be recognized by others. I did the thing, I was successful at it, I might display some relief, some celebration, but, hours or days later, I'm like, yeah, well, oh boy, now do I need to make up some other goal that isn't really, what I really want to do, but I'm afraid of admitting what I really want to do, so I have to make up some other thing as a cover story. There's an actual element of distress there. There's been an element of distress, and once I'm effective at producing something that I never really was that interested in, then the distress is right there at the surface. I'm not distracted from the background of distress by constant activity to pursue some goal that doesn't really interest me. So someone can have a sense that they have been betraying themselves by doing the thing that's not in alignment with their real interests. And finally now, after being successful, they have no way to avoid admitting their self-betrayal. They're not, they've produced the result. They really, ultimately, they get a little validation or whatever, and then they want more validation. There really was no satisfaction in the result itself. They're not proud that they did the thing. They're actually ashamed that they did the thing. There might be, some satisfaction or whatever, some hope, some celebration of the success of accomplishing the goal. But there won't be pride in the goal itself, in accomplishing the goal itself. So we can also, be aware that when I say these simple contrasts between pride and shame, that there are gray areas in between the two, or there's, occasions where there's elements of pride, but also elements of shame, So, So when someone's been effective in accomplishing a task that is contrary to their motivations, then they may have some relief or elation at, you know, no longer having to waste energy on trying to accomplish that task. So there's that. There may be a brief social celebration, and then when those social distractions subside or dissolve, then they settle into their background of discontent, grief, and shame. They've been doing something they didn't really care much about in the first place. They've stopped doing it. They no longer have that distraction. There's discontent, grief, shame. It might be agonizing, perfectionism. Okay, what do I do now as the next, heroic project, the next great reform? So once they've been effective at something, their theater of deception, including self-deception, has reached its conclusion. That particular, project is done. They've been effective at it, so they can't continue to target that goal. They won the election, or they won the reform, or whatever. So then they have to, basically settle into their background of discontent and find. Typically, what would happen is people will find a new reform campaign to pursue, a new heroic project, a new, we're going to rescue another damsel in distress, or another charity case that I'm going to fix the person or save the person or whatever. So after being successful at one goal that doesn't fit the actual motivations, then someone either chases another distraction from their background of distress, or they're simply confronted with their shame, and it's just sitting there, and they're just sitting in the experience of that shame and everything underneath the shame, everything, the background, the history, the emotion, the circumstances of one's life in that moment. They're just sitting in the undistracted reality of things, their experience without distraction, their experience without numbing out of it. So we'll come back to what is underneath shame a little bit more soon. To review, pride and shame are similar in that they both are the results of being effective in some activity. When someone is effective at producing an outcome that does not fit with their inner motivations and inspiration, that creates the effect of shame. The fact that people may claim to have certain motivations doesn't change what actual motivations and inspirations they experience. So what they say is distinct from what they can be distinct from what they experience. Shame is the natural sign for having produced a result that is contrary to one's inner compass. In contrast, pride is the natural signal for having produced results that are in alignment with one's inner compass. Again, whether or not someone claims to have a particular motivation or inspiration, they either have pride or they don't. Pride is the definitive signal of recognition that one has effectively produced a result that does fit with their own actual motivations. So, as I stated near the beginning, there are two more sets of contrasts, and I will quickly list both here, and then we'll talk about them further after that. So as a reminder, the other two pairs are commitment, contrasting with guilt, and trust, contrasting with anxiety. I'm talking about the experience of commitment, the spontaneous experience of commitment, not necessarily involving a statement of commitment. The experience of commitment and the experience of guilt, whether or not somebody admits to that experience of guilt. We could say the feeling of guilt, the feeling of commitment, the feeling of trust, and the feeling of anxiety, as distinct from what someone may or may not say about trust and anxiety. So I'll come back to that in a moment.